In the summer of 1940, Great Britain is under attack in the air and at sea. German U-boat wolfpacks prowl the Atlantic and sink over 1 million tons of shipping. German skippers call this the happy time, but was the German Navy actually that successful early in the Battle of the Atlantic? Only 30 minutes after the British declaration of war on September 3, 1939, Berlin issues new orders to its U-boat fleet. Open hostilities against England immediately. Do not wait to be attacked first. The order is not a surprise. Since late August, U-boats have been positioned around the British Isles, while 2 Panzerschiff, heavily armed cruisers also known as pocket battleships, are already at sea. But most of Dönitz's 46 operational U-boats are smaller, 250-ton Type 2s, unsuitable for extended operations, while some U-boats will always be in transit, training, or repair. Meanwhile, the Allied navies have more ships, firepower, and experience, and the largest merchant fleet in the world. But this power is divided up across the globe, and the UK is vulnerable economically, importing almost all its oil and half of its food. Chief of the German Navy High Command, Erich Raeder, quickly abandons Plan Z, a pre-war naval rearmament plan which prioritizes surface ships in favor of U-boat production. This is something U-boat Fleet Commander Karl Dönitz has been advocating for years. Raeder's surface ships will become raiders to sink merchant shipping and force the Allied navies to divide their forces. But the British also act. Unlike in WWII, they introduce a convoy system from the very start of the war. They establish routes to Gibraltar, the Caribbean, and Canada. Although ships which are either too slow or too fast for convoys sail independently. A fear of the German surface fleet means some early convoys are over-escorted by ships like battleships, cruisers, aircraft carriers, and submarines, the latter of which often cause confusion to jittery escort. U-boats fire some of the first shots of the war. On September 3rd, U-30 torpedoes and sinks the SS Athenia, a passenger ship heading for Canada, in an apparent case of mistaken identity. U-30 Captain Fritz Julius Lamp claims it acted suspiciously, although this was later disproven. In any case, the British believe Germany has already shifted to unrestricted submarine warfare and will not follow pre-war treaties controlling submarine operations. The so-called prize rules, which Germany signed, state submarines must first warn unarmed, unescorted merchant vessels before an attack and assist with evacuation. In response to these early attacks, Britain arms some merchant ships with older guns. Some U-boat captains do stick to the prize rules. Merchantman Captain Thomas Prince recalls being brought aboard U-48. The submarine halted my boat alongside and then ordered me to come on board and bring my papers. I told Captain Schulze I had none, because I had already destroyed them. He then asked me to have a drink with him, so we both had a tumbler full of whiskey. He told me he would send an SOS, and wished me the best of luck, and hoped we would meet again after the war was over. When I last saw him, he was standing in the conning tower with his hand on his forehead in a salute. But such policies do not last long. In response to armed merchant vessels and the impracticality of the rules in wartime, Raeder announces a sink on-site policy on September 23 for all enemy merchant vessels. U-boats also target warships and score some notable successes. A sub sinks British aircraft carrier HMS Courageous on September 17th, resulting in the withdrawal of carriers from escort duty. Then, on the night of October 13 and 14, Lieutenant Commander Günther Preen's U-47 sneaks into the British home fleet base of Scapa-Flow through a 15-meter gap in the harbor's incomplete defenses. Moving at full speed on the surface to counter adverse currents, U-47 identifies the battleship Royal Oak anchored at port. At such moments, feeling turns off. One thinks with the boat. One is the brain of the steel animal which is creeping up on the great overpowering ship. In such instances, one must think in iron and steel or go under. ever nearer. Now one can clearly make out the couplings of the gun turrets from which the barrels point threateningly. The ship lies there, the lights turned off, like a sleeping giant. The first torpedo salvo does little damage, and the second misses. However, a third ignites the ship's ammunition storage, resulting in a massive explosion. The Royal Oak rapidly sinks with 786 crew. However, Germany also loses capital ships. In the South Pacific, pocket battleship Graf Spee is on a rampage, sinking 9 cargo ships by December 1939. But its high-profile activities attract attention. After dueling with the British force at the River Plate, the British trapped the Graf Spee in Montevideo, and her crew scuttles her on December 17. And so by the end of 1939, both sides can count achievements and failures. Britain has lost 706,000 tons of shipping, including several notable ships. However, its convoy system holds firm. Half of the lost ships hit mines, and almost all sunk merchantmen are independently routed ships or convoy stragglers. The British developed countermeasures to magnetic mines as well. And of the 5,756 ships which sail in convoy in 1939, submarines only sink 4. So although the 1939 Scapa-Flow attack boosts German morale, U-boats are still not playing a critical role. This does not improve in early 1940, as U-boats and other ships are withdrawn for Operation Weserübung, the German invasion of Denmark and Norway. The Kriegsmarine also discovers a major flaw with their U-boats. Since September 1939, U-boat captains report malfunctions of the G7A and G7E torpedoes, both when armed for contact and magnetic demolition. Torpedoes often explode too early, or not at all, or they miss their target, whereas lone merchantmen can be attacked with deck guns. Sinking escorted ships or warships requires torpedo. In early 1940, Donitz estimates 330,000 tons of Allied shipping have been saved by malfunctioning torpedoes, including the carrier Ark Royal and battleship Warspite. Preen complains, "I cannot be expected again to fight with a wooden gun." The Germans investigate and develop new designs from captured British models. Torpedo performance improves, although issues remain until 1942. Despite this, U-boats are gaining momentum. The Norwegian operation, although successful, sees heavy losses in the surface fleet, shifting attention to the U-boats. More subs are also launched, including larger type Vefis. Furthermore, it's clear the war will not be over quickly, making Donitz's U-boat-centric economic warfare strategy more attractive to Hitler. The fall of France in 1940 provides more opportunities. Bases on the French Atlantic coast allow U-boats to operate 640 kilometers further into the Atlantic, where they can now threaten unescorted convoys in the mid-Atlantic Gap, an area beyond the endurance of escorts from Canada or the UK. German command removes restrictions on targeting neutral shipping, so they can attack any ship in the designated war zones except Italian, Japanese, Soviet, Spanish, or Irish vessels. The U.S. bars their vessels from entering such regions. As U-boat operations increase, Britain recalls escorts for anti-invasion duties, leaving too few for transatlantic convoys. To compensate, Canada rapidly expands the Royal Canadian Navy from 3,600 personnel to 10,000 by September 1940, and starts a native shipbuilding program, specializing in merchantmen, destroyers, and corvettes. But with less experience and a smaller economic base, such breakneck expansion will take time to have an impact. So despite a rough start to 1940, U-boats see more success from June. In fact, captains soon dubbed the period the Glückliche Zeit, the happy time. Overall, Donitz is still short on U-boats for immediate combat. Extensive operations mean roughly half are not available. He also was lost 25 by July 1940. However, he observes that British convoy escort tactics rely on their underwater sonar system known as WWII. By attacking on the surface at night, groups of U-boats can use their greater speed and visibility to confuse escorts and target merchantmen. Dönitz developed this so-called Rudel tactic before the war, but was reluctant to employ it when British escorts were numerous. Now, with many escorts in British waters or under repair, he has an opportunity, also known as Wolfpack tactics. The new approach is part of a tonnage war strategy to sink enough merchant shipping to force British capitulation, or at the very least, massively degrade its military potential. While Dönitz commands from his new headquarters at Lorient, he receives intelligence from the Navy's Beobachtungsdienst, which has access to British convoy naval ciphers. Using this information, he concentrates his most experienced captains for group attacks on known convoy routes. In June, 3 HX convoys from Halifax lose 7 ships, while in late August, U-boats in a rare coordination with aircraft sink 8 ships in convoy, HAX-65. On September 20th, 7 U-boats sink 11 ships in convoy, H-872. Several U-boat commanders, including Preen and Schulze, become aces, a title awarded for sinking 50,000 tons of shipping. The number of merchantmen sinkings in the North Atlantic also increases drastically from previous months. On October 16, 1940, several aces rendezvous for an attack on SC-7, a slow convoy from Sydney, Nova Scotia, with 35 merchantmen and 5 escorts. One escort is lost when it breaks off to pursue U-48 and fails to rejoin the convoy. Then, on the night of October 17, SE-7 passes through a patrol line of 5 U-boats. They sink 20 ships, 7 by Ace Otto Kretschmer's U-99. He describes an attack on SS Fiscus. 2,355. Fire a torpedo at a large freighter of some 6,000 tons at a range of 750 meters. Hit abreast foremast. Immediately after torpedo explosion, there is another explosion with a high column of flame from the bow to the bridge. The smoke rises some 200 meters. Bow apparently shattered. Ship continues to burn with a green flame. Shortly afterwards, Preen leads another attack on convoy HX-79 and sinks 12 more. Surface ships also add to the tally, with pocket battleship Admiral Steer sinking 6 ships from convoy HX-84. In all the attacks, British escorts perform poorly. They have no reliable means of intership communication. Few have surface radar, and escorts abandon convoys to chase U-boats or pick up survivors. By December 1940, Germany has sunk 4.3 million tons of Allied shipping since September 1939, roughly 55% of it by U-boats. Monthly losses are often double or triple the replacement rate of new shipping. Britain compensates for the heavy losses by tighter rationing, cutting imports, building more escorts, and looking for help from elsewhere. In 1939 and 1940, U.S. assistance to Britain and France is limited by the U.S. neutrality laws, anti-war public opinion, and the anti-interventionist America First movement. The U.S. forbids any military operations in an established neutrality zone, roughly alongside Hitler's specified zones in which neutral shipping might be attacked. Hitler wants to keep the U.S. out of the war, at least for now. He and others recall the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, which contributed to us entry in the First World War. So he orders naval commanders to stay away from American ships. The Naval High Command is to wage the war at sea in such a manner that incidents with the United States are avoided under all circumstances. But German leaders are frustrated with the U.S.'s support for Britain. Some U.S. figures publicly celebrate the Royal Navy's sinking of the Graf Spee, despite it taking place in the U.S.'s neutrality zone. In some cases, German captains let a sure kill pass rather than risk the danger of sinking a misidentified US ship. President Roosevelt is also supportive of British requests for armaments. Neutrality laws bar him from selling or transporting them, but Roosevelt claims they do not prevent him from bartering them. The result is the September 1940 Destroyers for Bases deal, in which Britain cedes sovereign rights to bases in the Caribbean, Newfoundland, and South America in exchange for 50 older US destroyers. Not everyone in the UK, including Winston Churchill, is enthusiastic about the destroyers, which have been poorly maintained and require overhaul. By May 1941, only 30 are in operation. But the deal is a shift in US policy. Roosevelt, fresh from electoral success in November, steps up cooperation, announcing a Lend-Lease program in December. This allows the U.S. to sell, transfer title to, exchange, lease, lend, or otherwise dispose of any US property to a state the President deems vital to US security. Equipment must be paid for and transported on foreign ships, but the details are deliberately vague and Britain can defer payment. Soon afterwards, in January 1941, Anglo-American cooperation deepens with the secret America-Britain-Canada I talks in Washington. The talks are designed to coordinate joint action if the U.S. joins the war and lay the groundwork of a Germany-first strategy and cooperation in transatlantic defense, convoys, and intelligence sharing. With the threat of largely over by early 1941, Churchill identifies the Atlantic as the vital theater of operations. After Hitler threatens a massive escalation in U-boat operations, Churchill responds. In February, as you remember, that bad man in one of his raving outbursts threatened us with a terrifying increase in the numbers and activities of his U-boats and in his attack. That is what is called the Battle of the Atlantic, which, in order to survive, we have got to win on saltwater just as decisively as we had to win the Battle of Britain last August and September in the air. So the U-boats are on the offensive and appear to be taking a toll, but Britain's Royal Navy is still strong, and the UK can concentrate on the Atlantic. So just how successful were the U-boats in 1940? Throughout the 4-month happy time in mid-1940, German U-boats sink around 1.1 million tons of Allied shipping. This is a significant increase over the first months of the year. But it's not decisive. Most sinkings are still independently sailing ships, and convoy attacks remain comparatively rare. After the Ski-7 battle, only 9 of the next 55 slow convoys suffer any losses at all. Donitz estimates U-boats need to sink at least 300,000 tons a month to degrade Britain's massive merchant fleet, which now includes ships from German-occupied territories, and to counteract replace. U-boats only achieved this goal in 2 months in 1940. Before the war, the Kriegsmarine struggled for influence within the German military hierarchy dominated by the army and the Luftwaffe, which were seen as more essential to Hitler's continental goals. Meanwhile, influential Nazis hoped that Britain would remain neutral in a European war. The Navy was further internally divided between Raeder, who favored a balanced fleet, and Donitz, who favored submarines and a nutritional strategy. Both approaches required long-term planning and time for construction, which contradicted Hitler's preference for short-term opportunism and bold action. Even after Berlin approved Plan Z in 1939, the Navy struggled to get the resources allotted to it, and Raeder was pessimistic. As far as the Navy is concerned, obviously it is in no way very adequately equipped for the great struggle with Great Britain. The submarine arm is much too weak. The surface forces, moreover, are so inferior in number and strength to those of the British fleet that even at full strength, They can do no more than show that they know how to die gallantly. As a result, when war did break out in 1939, 9 years earlier than Plan Z's expected completion date, the Kriegsmarine was ill-prepared for either Raiders or Donitz's preferred strategy. There were not enough surface ships to challenge the Royal Navy in open battle. And although ships like the Graf Spee grabbed headlines with their surface raids, the amount of merchant tonnage sunk was low considering their construction time, crew size, maintenance requirements, and fuel consumption. U-boats are much more efficient and cost-effective merchant raiders. But pre-war prioritization of larger ships means there are not enough subs in 1940. But it's important to note that Dönitz knows this and was encouraged by the damage caused by only a handful of U-boats. During the happy times, only an average of about 6 U-boats were immediately available to attack a given convoy. If Dönitz had 300 operational U-boats, most of the larger design, he anticipates far surpassing the success of the happy times. But time is working against Germany. According to Vice Admiral Kurt Assmann, after the war, Dönitz believed he had roughly 2 years before the Allies would advance in technology and ships to effectively counter the U-boats. This placed additional time pressure on shipbuilding, sea trials, and training. And Britain does not sit idle. In late 1940, the Royal Navy creates 8 specially trained escort groups with better anti-submarine weapons, VHF radios between ships, more coastal command aircraft, and new technology. But U-boats are just one of their concerns, since at least 2 of Plan Z's ambitious designs will soon take to the seas. They are the largest warships Germany has ever built, the Bismarck and the Tirpitz. 5 years after the happy times for the German U-boat fleet, Admiral Dönitz becomes head of state and supreme commander of the armed forces of Nazi Germany. After, that is, Adolf Hitler and Goebbels commit suicide in the Reich Chancellery bunker as the Red Army is closing in on the city center during the climax of the Battle of Berlin. If you want to learn more about the Battle of Berlin, you should check out our 4.5-hour, 18-part documentary series 16 Days in Berlin, covering the entire battle day by day with detailed maps, animations, expert interviews, and more. 16 Days in Berlin is the most detailed documentary about this battle ever produced. With our uncompromising portrayal using authentic combat footage, we couldn't upload it to YouTube because of their advertising guidelines. So where can you watch 16 Days in Berlin? On Nebula, a streaming service we're building together with other creators where we don't have to worry about advertising guidelines or the almighty algorithm. Nebula is available in 4K resolution in your browser, on your smartphone, smart TV, or streaming box like Apple TV or Roku. If you go to nebula.tv/realtimehistory, you can watch 16 Days in Berlin, our other original documentaries Rhineland, 45 and Red Adams, as well as a host of other smart creators, and all that for just $36 for an entire year. Right now, you can also get the Nebula Lifetime Membership. Pay once and get access to everything Nebula has to offer for as long as you and Nebula exist. The Lifetime Membership allows us to invest in more original content and improve the platform for everyone. 1/3 of your lifetime membership will also support us at Real Time History directly. As usual, you can find all the sources for this episode in the video description below. For more on the Battle of the Atlantic, check out our previous video about the U-boat's unhappy times in May 1943. If you're watching this video on Nebula or Patreon, thank you so much for the support. We couldn't do it without you. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real Time History, the only history channel that knows about Assmann's post-war career as a New York proctologist.